to the British Keelboat Sailing online match racing sessions. Tonight we're going to be looking at the Upwind. If this is your first session that you've joined in on, then please feel free to take a look at the previous sessions where we've looked at the debriefs of the events and also the pre-start. So tonight we're going to be looking at what Upwind information you need. So obviously there's a lot of information that you can collect before the start, and this is really valuable. It might sound simple, but what to do if you're ahead? Obviously you want to stay ahead, but how are you going to do that? What are you going to do if you're behind? And the Upwind set plays. Obviously a lot of the things we're going to be talking about also depend on the setup of the course. So what you find with match racing, often it's tucked into a corner to make it spectator friendly. So you may have gain features that may be part of your course. So for example, land, walls, you may have buildings, and all of these things are gonna have a big impact. So gaining that information before the start line and making a strategy so that when the race comes, it's hopefully easier to stick to your plan. So within match racing, we're actually quite lucky. We get the opportunity to watch other races. So we can gain a lot of information from those other races. So it's really important to try and tune in to what's happening on the race course. If you're the first start, you still need to get this information. If you're the second start, you still need to get this information. So it's important that you do have a bit of a checklist before you get onto the racetrack or when you get into the boats. So the first key area I would say for the beat is the beat square. So what do we mean by this? This means, are we going to spend the same amount of time on starboard tack to port tack and vice versa? If we are, and if we are pointing head to wind and the windward mark is on our bow, that shows that the beat is square. So quite a simple one is the setup. The sails, the trim, the balance of the boat, how is it going to pan out for your race? Remembering that your races are very short, so actually any little burst of speed that you can get to either extend or catch up and try and attack is really important. What you'll find with match racing is you can't tune the rig, so the controls that you can use are fairly basic. I think it's really important to own your area as well, which leads us on to the communication. Making sure that if you're the jib trimmer, make sure that you have that time to look at your jib and your car setup, and if it's not happening from the back of the boat, get the helm, communicate with the helmsman and the mainsail trimmer to go upwind, check the angles, check the sail setup, and hopefully you have enough time to do this. If not, it goes back to looking at other boats, seeing what's available and going with your feel. What you will find is there's quite a quick turnaround between races, so you may not always have time to do this, and therefore actually prioritising what information you need to get is quite important. The next area is the game features. So as we've spoken about before, match racing is obviously a spectator friendly sport. You often see it tucked in close to the shore to help the spectators, and also this makes it quite challenging. So what do we mean by game features? This could mean that you might be using the shore as a boundary. You might have a building that the wind's wrapping around. You may have trees, you may have tide. There's a lot of different things that could be game features, and it's important that you try and spot those before you start the race. Boundaries, especially on the upwind, boundaries are really important and can be a really important part of the upwind. There can be a lot of umpire calls in this area. If you go outside the boundaries, and they've been stated in the sailing instructions, then you could get a penalty. So making sure you know where those boundaries are, and if it's not a long row of marks, to point them out, at which points from the land or other marks is the boundary in line with. Trends. So what we mean by this is, are there any trends with the wind shifts? Is it stable? It's as I've said before, use the other boats, use the other matches, and keep track of it. It's really easy, especially in the pre-start, to get lost in what shift phase you are in. It's exactly the same as fleet racing. You want to sail on the lifted tack to take you to the windward mark quickest, and also that helps with the long tack. Which windward mark? So this might sound a bit bizarre, but what we mean by this is that there's often more than one windward mark. That doesn't mean you go round all of them. It just means that when you're entering into the pre-start at 4 minutes, they may display a different coloured flag for a different windward mark, and this just gives them options. And then we've got tactics v strategy. So have a strategy before you start, and then that makes, when the two boats meet, a bit clearer about which tack you want to be on. So here it's really important that all of the crew, goes back to the communication, are on the same page, so that when you come together, it's not going to be a surprise for the jib person or the main person to tack. It's keeping that communication up the whole time and sticking to your plan. So we're now going to look at the objectives as the boat ahead, and some of these might sound obvious, but as we've mentioned in previous sessions, it's really easy to get distracted and forget about the simple parts of sailing and the winning side of it. The first one we're looking at is stay ahead and extend your lead. This is one of the more obvious ones, but it's really easy for the crew, the helm, to look behind and not sail the boat fast and almost stare at the other boat, and at which time they're just attacking you and getting closer and closer. And you have to remember that the upwind is easier to defend a lot of the time than the downwind is. So if you can extend your lead on the upwind, that's a really key area. It also helps if you've got a penalty and you're ahead and you want to take that penalty, being able to extend really helps open the options up of where you can take that penalty. When coming together, force them to the less favourable side. So this goes back to the square beat. So which is the longest tack? If you're not sure which is the longest tack or shortest tack, make sure that you're bouncing them off away to the left, so you're always coming back at them on starboard. Easier said than done. If you are coming together, try and force them onto the shorter tack. You're always trying to be on the long tack as the boat in front, and if you push them out onto the short tack, they're going to run out of options. An obvious one, but sail the shortest distance. Use those shifts and the trends that you've got before the start to help you with this. Don't do unnecessary manoeuvres. Really, really easy in match racing to think that you've got to go into a tacking duel. If you're in a tacking duel, don't be afraid to extend and pick up speed and then come back together. It's only going to help you. Set yourself up so that you're giving the other boat dirty air. This obviously is a bit of a balance with the point above, where you don't do unnecessary manoeuvres. But if you can have one person looking at the other boat the whole time, it really helps with giving them dirty air, helping them to go slower, basically taking away their options. And as I've mentioned a bit before, if the beat looks even, try to stay to the right. So you're trying to gain that starboard advantage. Remember, we go around the windward mark to starboard. So coming in on starboard at the windward mark is a really powerful move. So what are we going to do as the boat behind? Again, this is going to sound quite simple, but minimise your losses. So don't do unnecessary manoeuvres. trying to stay on the lifted tack, all of these things, trying to outsmart the boat in front. Position your tacks so that you gain out of it. So, same point as we had as when you're ahead. Try and push the leader to the shortest tack, or push them to the area that has less wind on the course. This is where you need somebody looking out in front of the boat, somebody looking at the other boat, but also somebody looking at the overall strategy and the long-term options. Again, this is going to sound very similar, but don't do too many maneuvers. Do it if it's slowing the leader down and your opponent down, but if you're slowing down and they're gaining, just don't be afraid to extend just to pick up some speed and then bring it back together. If you're behind, cut your losses and lead the tack out. It helps you get up to speed quicker. They are reacting to your manoeuvre, so they're going to be a bit slower. They're not going to be prepared. So this is a real good opportunity to make those little gains and try and bite away at the leader. So sail fast, obvious one, obviously we're going to sail fast. So if you're in a keelboat that involves hiking, make sure you're doing maximum hiking. The Elliots in Weymouth, they're quite easy because they've got hiking straps. Make sure you're doing everything you can to make those gains. So a really common move in a match race upwind is a lee bow tack. If you do it accurately, you can make massive gains out of this, forcing the other boat to tack out quite straight away. There's also other scenarios where you might tack too soon or too late and it goes a bit wrong. So we've got a few examples here just to run through. The first one is actually done really well by both boats, and Square does gain out of it, so the starboard tacker does eventually gain out of it, but actually the positioning of the port boat and where they tack is actually pretty good. I think what we find in this situation is that Square just had a little bit more speed. So trying to keep your speed up throughout the tack is really important. What you'll find as a crew is that often the helm gets a bit distracted because they are staring at the other boat and trying to get really close to them. So we are just going to watch this through. So we've got Square's actually going bow down here at this point so that they open up the gauge when port tack's there. So you can see Square's about to take the height and opens up the gauge. They can actually hold in there for quite a long time because Square's managed to get a bit more bow forward on the boat that's tacking beneath them. The lighter the wind, the more powerful it might be for the leeward boat tacking in. The heavier the wind, it's often quite easy to hold in there. So you may choose to do this in different conditions and not do it in other conditions. The other scenario where you might not do it is if you really want the right hand side, you may go for a duck. As you can see in this situation, it would be a massive duck and probably quite a big loss for the port tack boat. So if you went from there and went for a duck, you're losing 2 boat lengths. So that's another reason why a lee bow tack can be quite powerful. As you can see here, the windward mark is in the middle of the screen at the top, and it's long starboard. So actually, I think the port boat tacking in there is actually quite a powerful move because they're going to be right behind the windward boat on the downwinds and can potentially steal its air. So it's thinking about the big picture as well. You may not be able to make that gain straight away, but if you've got a plan and can stay close to them on the downwind, then you've got more of a chance of overtaking them. So in this situation, I think the starboard boat's done a really good job of creating that gap between the 2 boats, but I also think the port tack boat has done a really good job of tacking in close, and it's just unfortunate you can't control the starboard boat getting the bow down. So we've got another example of a lee bow tack here. So we've got A tacking underneath. It's actually quite a nice tack. And then we've got D tacking. What you'll find here is actually, I think, in position-wise, it was probably the right thing to do. But after the tack, you can see how much distance D has lost by not going close enough to A. If they could have pushed it a little bit further, they then would have maybe forced A to tack out again and be in control. As it turns out, I haven't got time to watch the whole video, but D basically ends up going off on a random angle whilst A just keeps gaining and gaining, and the gauge between the boats is opened. So if you're not too sure, especially in this situation, of whether you can pull off a lee bow tack, don't be afraid to go for the duck. You're going to gain that starboard advantage back. It has to be quite a... you must really want the left if you do a tack like this and don't execute it as well as you had hoped. So one of the more exciting manoeuvres in a match race, Upwind, is a dial down. The point of the dial down is for the starboard boat, so in this case the yellow boat, to gain an advantage over the port boat, the blue boat. So what they are trying to do is either trying to force them to tack, or they're trying to get them to bear away behind them, but it ends up being a really big bear away in which they lose out of. We are, as the starboard boat, not allowed to go below 90 degrees to the true wind. So you're not allowed to go downwind. If you do, you might end up getting a penalty. And basically you're not allowed to hunt the port tack boat. So making sure under 16.1 you are holding your course and not hunting in a way that they can't keep clear. So we've got the two boats coming together here. They get the bow down aiming at the blue boat. And as you can see, the yellow boat here has made at least a boat length or two gain on the port boat, making it really hard for the port boat to duck. If the port boat manages to duck quite successfully, but it hasn't quite gone too well as the starboard boat. As the starboard boat, you want to try and tack as soon as possible so that you can pin them. This example is obviously best practice and a good example to go off. But if it does go wrong and it's not quite going to plan, make sure that you do try and tack as soon as possible so that then you can pin them on port. One of the other options here is that the blue boat can't bear away behind the yellow, meaning that it needs to tack and then it's pinned out to the port lay line. As you can see, there's quite a lot of things to take into consideration in this, so you need to be pretty confident that you are going to gain from it. There's been many times, and a lot of it is trial and error, where you go for it and it's the wrong move at that time, or you've given away the right hand side, which might be the favoured side. So it's really important that you know and that the crew are tuned in to doing it so you are max speed when you get the bow down. We're now moving on to the slam dunk, and we have talked about this in previous sessions in the debrief session. So rather than a video, we have got a diagram here, and we have been through this before, so sorry if you've heard this, but it's quite an important manoeuvre that can again go wrong. So what we've found so far is a lot of these manoeuvres can be quite risky if you haven't practiced them, but at the same time the best way to practice them is to try them. So Upwind slam dunk. As the lead boat, you're trying to do everything you can to extend, and as the port boat, you're trying to do everything you can to catch up. So here we have the blue boat in diagram 1, the blue boat crossing behind the yellow. As this happens, yellow goes into attack. Now what you need to be really careful as yellow is that you complete your tack. You don't have any rights whilst tacking, so therefore trying to get down to port onto port is really important. What you'll find here is that you're trying to get your bow down to complete your tack, but blue will come up and take you head to wind. At this point, blue has all the rights because you as yellow become windward boat. You haven't completed your tack, or you may have just completed it, and you're also slow because you have just tacked. As you can see in diagram 3, the yellow tries to get the bow down. Now, this is quite a tricky procedure to pull off, because if you're in a boat such as an Elliott, you may just go sideways at this point. If you have an imbalance between the jib and the main, and you've got more jib on the main sheet, you may get the bow down too far and may cause a collision. So teamwork and communication at this point is really important. And as a jib trimmer, you just need to be ready for anything. And as the main trimmer, you need to be able to know what the feel is in the rudder. So keeping those comms up with the helm is really important. In this situation, yellow manages to get the bow down, not break a rule, luckily, and still be in relative control. However, they're not going to stay there for very long. So you're trying to, as yellow, gain gauge from the blue. So it might be that you can try and get your bow down to get some speed and then come back up. And if you get those little bow downs before the blue boat does, you may be able to just pick your moment and open the gauge up. Quite a hard, tricky manoeuvre to pull off, but can be really powerful. Just remember the rules in this situation, so you are putting yourself in a riskier position. And again, if you're not sure about it, it may not be worth it. You may be doing this because you don't want the blue boat on port to get to the right of you. If the right is paying, or if you want that starboard advantage, which is normally quite powerful, then it's something you have to do as the yellow boat to try and stay in the game. Otherwise, you're giving away the favoured side as well as the starboard tack advantage. One area you may want to talk about before your race starts is, or throughout the race, is the type of cover that you want on the other boat. So there may be scenarios where you just have a loose cover, which might seem quite alien to new match racers. Why would you want to give the boat behind options to tack when they want? Well, a few options. You may be on the lifted tack as the lead boat. You may have good speed. You may be trying to avoid tacking if it's lighter airs. There's a few different options of why you would do it. So this is an example of a loose cover. So as you can see, the Delta Lloyd boat has continued on starboard here. They are going to go for a tack soon, but what you find is that one, who we can see more prominently, has tacked back. That is not an issue. Delta Lloyd boat has chosen to do that. And then they are going to tack back onto starboard and give a loose cover. And this goes back to the point where you're trying to keep yourself between the windward mark and the boat behind. Another option is a tight cover. So when you might do a tight cover is when you haven't got a lee bow tack, you've got enough distance between you that you're not actually going to interact in a dial down or a slam dunk, which we've talked about previously, but they're close enough that they could be a bit of a worry. As you can see in this lighter airs, that's usually when it's a bit more unnerving. The boats are at different speeds often, and so actually that's where a tight cover might become in more useful. It's quite hard to do it in windier weather just because it's a bit harder to tack and manoeuvre. So here we've got a video of a tight cover. So here we've got both boats tacking. It looks like they're going into a tacking duel. But the boat in front tacks back. And actually, if you can see the windward mark just to the right, middle right of the screen, it actually looks like it's slightly longer port. So we've got two scenarios here, whereas a tight cover However, the other boat has been able to tack out. Not a problem though, because they've pushed that boat behind onto the shorter tack. So it's actually really good manoeuvre from the boat in front. So it's often easy to forget about actually sailing the boat well. And what you'll find in match racing, because there's just one other boat, is you tend to do more moding. So, for example, in this picture that we can see on the screen, we've got two boats that are on the same leg, but pointing completely different angles. Obviously, it does look quite light. We've got people in the boat. However, there's a few things that can help the windward boat hold in there, which in this case, they're not doing as well as they could be. So one of those areas is the sail setup. So if you can see this boat on the left here, it's got a very twisty setup in the sail. They have got, looking with my mouse here, this is the main sheet, meaning that the traveller is all the way across the boat in a Elliot. The traveller is only in the middle here. What you need in this situation to gain height is to have the boom on the centre line, which involves having the traveller all the way up, and then they can probably pull a little bit of main sheet on. What you will find in these lighter airs is that you do need to ease the main sheet slightly more than you would in the windier airs, just to get up to speed and then gain height. So this might be fine if they are in that mode of going to get speed to take the height. However, I'd say in this situation it's probably quite a risky move and they're a bit too close to the boat to leeward. It's not the same angle to look at the sail from behind, but if you look at triangle, it looks like they've got a bit of a straighter setup on the leech, which will help give them a bit more height. It's quite challenging to see, but if you can see here, this is their main sheet and they've got the traveller all the way up, so it'll be right by the helmsman's foot there, which is what they want, and that's why they're able to gain the height. This is where the communication comes back into it, so making sure that the helm and the sail trimmers are talking to each other for what they want. So as this windward boat here, as a helm, I'd be saying, right, we need a high mode here. And at that point, that's where the sails need to change and basically help the helmsman be able to hold that lane. Another thing that will help is the controls. So maybe not so much in this picture in particular because it's light winds, but if the wind's up a little bit more, make sure you're pulling on more kicker to help gain some height. Basically, if you have this bit of the main sail too open, which in this case this one is, then that means that you are not going to be able to get the height that you need. And vice versa, if you need to get a bow down mode, you may want to ease the kicker. So thinking about what you would do in your dinghies, in your fleet racing that you normally do, is exactly the same practice. What you will find is there's more emphasis and maybe exaggerated angles in match racing because there is only one other boat. If you do it in fleet racing, on an exaggerated scale, you may lose out on a group of boats. So that's why the moding in match racing and being on cue with the rest of the team is really important. Another thing that can help the moding is the weight. So going back to this picture, one other thing, it's light winds, but also to help get your height, you go weight forward. And as we've talked about before, if you're getting the bow down, then you might go weight back a little bit. It's really basic things, but it's really, really easy to forget when you're in the middle of a match race. This is one picture we talked about before. So as you can see, we've got a little bit more wind in this picture. And it's making sure that you are setting up for those conditions. So I'm just going to talk you through this picture. So one thing that is blaring out to me is these this crew, this is not hiking. Especially in something like the Elliots, it's a boat that's basically a big dinghy. So we need to make sure that everyone is hiking. This boat in particular were wondering why they weren't as quick upwind, and these are the reasons why. So rule number one: hike. If you are in a boat that has hiking straps, it's easy. If you are in a boat that's slightly bigger, where you would normally lean over a rail, but there's no rails, use the sheets to hike off. Use the bottom of the shrouds. There's lots of different options, so make sure you're getting your weight out. The other thing which we just talked about is this traveller. So in this condition, it's probably playing the main sheet quite a lot or playing the traveller quite a lot. What you'll find here is they've gone quite high up with the traveller, but they've got the main sheet quite open. So every time they ease the main sheet, this bit here is getting bigger and bigger, which is not going to help their height and also going to spill loads of power. So we're trying to get maximum power at all times. So what I would suggest in this situation is that you go traveller down slightly, and then go main sheet on. And these boats are quite nice. The helmsman is next to the traveller, so they can take it of how they feel on the rudder. If you do that though, and you split up the roles, make sure that you're in sync. What you don't want is the traveller all the way down and the main sheet out. So in summary, it's probably quite an overwhelming topic. Because there's so many different areas. I think it's easy to forget that you just need to sail fast. And I think I've said this in every single session. Remember, it's a boat race that you need to win, and you're going to do that by sailing fast. So rule number one is sail fast. Don't overcomplicate it. So if you do get an attacking duel, don't be afraid to extend. Don't be drawn back into it if you don't think it's the right thing to do. Try and keep it simple. In lighter winds, you don't want to be tacking too much because it's slow. In heavier winds, you may be in a boat that's hard to tack, so you may not want to do it too much. So think about the basics. Don't overdo the manoeuvres. So as we've just said, tacking is slow. Pick your moment of when you're going to do it. If it involves holding 5 seconds longer to get into more pressure to then tack, then wait. It's really important that you are looking outside of the boat at these moments. Break down the roles. We haven't gone into too much detail in this tonight, but there have been areas where I have tried to emphasise the fact that it's not all on the helm. It's making sure that the trimmers and the helmsman are in tune with each other, as well as having somebody looking out and looking at the overall picture. So, as an example, in a 3-man boat, we would have the helmsman making the final decision because they've got the stick. And we have the main sheet looking at the other boat and calling the relatives on the other boat. And then we'll have the bow person looking upwind, looking at what's coming next and helping everyone pull the information together. It also means that you're not looking at the same thing. Risk v reward. So I spoke about trial and error. There is a lot of that in match racing, so don't worry about that. That's how we learn. But are you going to gain from doing a dial down, or are you going to lose out of it? So it's trying to find that balance of what manoeuvres are going to work well, what is worth doing, what is worth trialling. If you're going to practice a manoeuvre and going to go to an event where you're trying new things, make sure that everyone on the boat is aware of that. Because if you go to an event and one person thinks that you're trying to win it, another person thinks that you're trying to trial stuff out, then you're going to come into a bit of a problem. So make sure you've got the right balance of risk v reward. If you're behind, stay close, especially as there will be opportunities. You finish on the downwind normally, so there's always opportunities on the downwind, which is what we'll be talking about next time. So that is all on the Upwind. I'm sure I could keep talking about the Upwind for a lot longer, but our time is up. But thank you very much for listening. Look forward to seeing you all next time.